Pydantic AI is a framework that provides a bridge between developers and agents. It allows to give tools to agents and it allows to validate the data back from agents. And what it does best is that it really understands how data works and how to validate it. So the input that you give it to an agent and the input that comes out of an agent. And in this video, we're going to look at a Pydantic AI blog writing agent, something that searches the web, something that writes the text, puts in the sources, puts in the research that we had on the web, and also polishes the text and structures it as is best based on the topic that you give it to research and to write about. And my name is Liam van Vliet, and on this channel, we focus on creating real business value with AI. And in this video, we're going to discover a bit more about agents. Before we will start with going into this video and into the agent and the code, I will give some context to this blog writing agent. I will link the documentation for Pydantic AI and also for the tools that I used for my agent in the description of this video. So there you can find everything that we talk about and see for yourself and go deeper into it. And now we will start this video and we will start with some core concepts. And these concepts, I've selected the ones that I find very useful and essential to build or start building AI agents that deliver real business value. Pydantic is one of the best frameworks out there to build AI agents. Why? Because it is model agnostic, which means that we can easily swap out certain models. So you can maybe one day decide you want to use 4.0, you put in the 4.0 model. If you want to change to use a Claude model, you put in a Claude model. And that's the key to building really reliable AI systems, because you are not dependent on one provider and maybe their prices or their changes to their model. And that's why you, for example, would go for a Pydantic AI framework instead of something that's from OpenAI. Even though it might work well, that's exactly the case. They want to lock you in, and with a Pydantic AI framework, that is not the case. So we will quickly run through some examples and then we will switch over to the blog writing agent. So we're going to quickly run through the documentation and then we will look at the blog writing agent, because it will make more sense and you will see it applied in my blog writing agent. So starting off, we are looking at the dependencies, which are basically the data classes that I talked about earlier. So from data classes, we import a data class. Basically how this works is that the dependencies, so what the agent needs, where it's dependent on, is accessed through the run context type. And you'll see it used here. So in this sense, we have this agent function and there it gets the system prompt and it is given the dependency. And in this case, it's this data class mydeps. And basically it has an API key with a string and an HTTP client. So it can run, it can do anything without this data class and this format of data. So that's in a nutshell what dependencies are. It will get more and we will explain it more within the blog writing agent. Going over to tools. So of course the AI, it works with tools. Tools are the things it uses to do things. And we already see some tools right here. So we basically have this example of an agent which is initialized. It is dependent on this data class, which has the API key and the HTTP client. And the agent also has this tool. So how tools work is we see a tool added here to the agent that was defined earlier. As we can see here, agent. And now the agent understands that it can use this tool. And what this tool does is it basically gets the joke material, the joke from a certain website through an API, I believe. And then it is validated. And that's how it basically puts out a joke. So that's already in a nutshell how then functions and dependencies work. So it could not perform that tool without the data class that gave the API key and the HTTP client. Looking a bit closer at tools, so we have the tool that we just saw, which needs access to the agent context. So it has that dependency, it needs that data class. But there's also a possibility to add a tool plain, which do not need any context of the agent. So here we can see an example of a tool plain, and that's basically a simple tool defined in this sense a role of a die, which doesn't need any context. It can just basically perform this simple function of chance and numbers. So how does the agent work? Basically an overview of this agent and how it works. So it starts the block creation. The function, this orchestration basically is run. It starts by selecting research focus areas. So you give it a topic, and then it basically thinks what are certain areas that we would want to research to create this block. And of course the system prompt has some sort of predefined way of writing things, but still it can decide on the topic if it's technical, if it's something like opinion based, if it's something like business focused. In that sense it can play a bit with the areas that are still able to be filled in by the agent. So it selects those research focus areas. It then uses the Perplexity API to perform a search and research the topic and the certain focus areas. It then formats the research results, and these are basically already two different agents. So it's an orchestration agent, which then also connects to a research agent. That research agent then formats its results, combines the research results. That gets basically used by another agent, which also puts out an outline, and there the block format and structure is formed. And from that we have the block plan and the section outline, which is then put through to a writer agent, a section writer agent. So this starts creating the sections. It starts writing the sections, which are then basically nice and easy blocks for other agents to then process. So what we do after that we wrote those, or the agent has written the sections, it gives them to a review agent, which looks at the word count, if it's still in line with the amount of words that we basically want, for example, for an opinion piece. And it also checks for the coherence. So if the flow and everything connects well, if the text flows in each other, if the connection between the certain sections is well enough. So that review agent then basically either says it's okay, or it performs a revision, it does a polish of this text, and after this is done, it basically has checked, okay, is the length okay, is the flow of the text okay, are there any sources in there, and if that's all right, it then basically combines the sections again, has performed this final blog review, and then puts out this completed polished blog. This might seem like a lot, and what we see right here in Figma is basically a very simple flow of how this agent works. This is high over how different agents that I've created work together to create a blog, and we will go deeper into this, but this is basically how it works, how you need to think of this agent. So looking a bit at the configurations, starting off, we start with looking at the format configuration. We have some predefined block formats here with some more details. So in this sense, a short news block update would be between 150 and 300 words, straight to the point structure with just the headline, key facts, and the conclusion. And these are basically the details with each block format that we have defined, which the agent then uses to create a outline, a certain blog writing plan. So when we scroll down, it's better for me to search. Yes. So when we scroll down, we basically see here how it works. So how does it work? Well, the orchestration agent, which basically runs everything, Also has a specialized agent to determine the appropriate format. So it basically runs with this prompt. So short news update, in-depth analysis, opinion piece. This is then used by this agent. It chooses a format, and that chosen format is then validated with that configuration. So it basically it checks for the format that it has defined, it has chosen, and then it also pulls in from the configuration the extra details that we defined there. Thing that you need to know about this is you don't have to use this. This is something basically just to show you how you can think about in the architecture or in the way that you set up agents on how you would set things up. So, because if you look very deep into how this works, it can maybe be overwhelming. Important now is to just think of building blocks, and then this is our first building block. We put in configurations. This is not mandatory, this is just optional and a good practice, in my opinion. We continue looking at the data types. So this defines the format of the AI's answers. So you basically want, and you can also validate this, but you always want the agent to answer in a certain way. And you want to be sure of it, because we all know the examples of companies that were early to hop on this AI hype and basically create agents or chats that then went awry. So I believe it was DHL, the postal company, that had this chatbot which spoke of some terrible things within their chat, which was then highlighted by the media, which is basically a good example of not making sure that your agent always answers within certain boundaries. And so we define classes, and I've put in all my classes in here. And starting off, a good one to look at is the research results. So this is results that we want from the research agent. So we give it a name of one of the results. So in this case, we want a variable filled with the research title. So this is a string. And what this string is, this is a top level markdown heading that covers the topic of the query and answer. Prefix it with hashtag. So this basically are the things that I wanted from the research agent to give back as results. So the title, what it is about, and the results that it got back from Perplexity. Also within bullets, some points. So what were the main points made by this article or whatever it found. And then some research sources, which we can use later to put back into the blog text. And then, of course, also the source URLs, which we can put at the end of the article for people to look at further. So this is basically another important building block. The classes that you define, which basically create this nice way of really ensuring the answers that you get, the results that you get from your agent. And a good thing here again is, okay, because you can basically go deep into this and start thinking, but how does it exactly know what the section type is, or what the research title would be, or what the research main would be? That's basically the beauty of Pydantic. There are a lot of things abstracted away. So certain things you can look definitely into within the documentation, and there is way more to this than I'm just making it sound right now. But for us to know and to start with building agents, it's good to keep it simple and basically see classes as a way for you to define what the answer is going to be from the agent, and then put your trust in the agent being smart enough to understand what that feedback would be. And of course, this research results is dependent on what the API of Perplexity is going to give back whenever you put a request in. So in this sense, of course, Perplexity has a very good API, which which gives a lot of results back. So it's very easy in that sense to get certain results with an agent using this API. But yeah, that's basically how you need to think about classes, and it's a very good way to start, and also a nice way to build out the architecture of your agent, to start thinking, okay, but what are the answers, what are the responses needed for me to get to this final output that I want. So here we have again defined what we expect from the orchestrator to give us a response. So a topic analysis, target audience, sections to write, the research results from the research agent, which it's going to basically call and then put through those results to for example, the section writing agent. And the interesting function that we see here is the field validator. So this is a function from Pydantic which which enables us to validate the answers from the agent through the class. So we expect sections back, but what we expect is that we have at least 3 sections. We want at least 3 sections. Otherwise, we raise a value error. We say that the block plan must include at least 3 sections. So this field validator is a very handy tool already, which is another logic layer on top of the class, which validates if certain things about the response of the agent. It gets more into the details of the response and makes sure that you get what you have intended to get from the agent. So moving over, we go to our second step. These are the dependencies, the things that the agent needs for it to perform its task. So what we see here is basically the dependencies, the things that the block writing agent, for example, is dependent on. So we have multiple agents in here, and looking at one, for example, in this class section dependencies, everything is defined with data class, as you can see. And specifically for the section writer agent, we define that it is dependent on, for example, a today's date, a string of today's date. So in the code somewhere, I've put in for my agent a function that basically gets the day of today, so that whenever it starts writing, it knows that we are living in 2025. And that's very important for it not to go awry, because of course not all of the models go back or are up to date right now. Today's date is, for example, very important, as is the research results, from which it basically takes the text which it uses to write its blog. And there are another couple of things that I've used within my prompt, which are of course needed then for the agent to be able to use its tools and its prompt. So, and these are defined in here. For example, also the target word count we already defined with the format agent, a certain block format, and that block format had a certain word count defined. And we still need that, so that's basically that we put this word count within multiple agents, as you can see here, so that it knows that it has to stay within those word limits, or reach that count of 1200 words, for example, with an in-depth article. So I wanted to make a quick video because I noticed something that was a little bit unclear. That is the dependency types. So what is good to know is that, as you saw, we defined the dependency types. So we create the data classes, and then we tell the agent what kind of dependencies it expects. So we already saw that as well. So it depends on, and it only works when it gets, for example, the today's date. And then we construct the actual dependency object with values. And the way that we do that is basically have this variable that we set, this class, this dependency, and set it through this way. So either we already have something defined for today's date, and we basically just use that variable already. But some things can also come from the function, from the agent that does the work. So if the agent defines target length, then we basically take it from the result that we get from the agent. And then we pass it to agent run. So we provided a dependency instance when running the agents. So what you see here, Python copy result, the await section writer agent.run, and then deps is section deps. And then we inject the dependencies here. So that's basically how this works. So you always use deps. This is a fixed parameter name by Pydantic. So that's basically how dependencies work. So looking a bit more into, okay, but what are all the clauses that I have, for example, defined? So I have some block dependencies. I have, and these are more general. So the topic, today's date, target length, and style. Then of course we have the more in-depth section dependencies. We also have some outline dependencies. We have some resource dependencies, because there, of course, it's also very important that the agent understands that we are living in 2025. We have some writer dependencies, some review dependencies as well. Yeah, a lot of the things here are reused just to make sure that everybody or all the agents understand or know the context that is needed for them to perform the task. So moving over to step 3, we have the classes, we have the dependencies. Now we're going to define some agents. So one of the most important agents within this whole flow that I've shown you at the beginning of this video is the orchestrated agent. Within here, of course, we have a lot of the things that steer its brain, the instructions of the LLM, of the agent. We see it's dependent on the outline. Here we have the prompt, which is also dependent on one of those things, as we already talked about. So like the topic, the type of block, target length, today's date. And yeah, here again, I specify a couple of things which are important. So the format guidelines, which it has to understand and follow. Basically some more specific about my audience that I write to, or the sections that I want to have written about. Writing system prompts is basically a lot of trial and error. You don't really know how it's going to adhere to the system prompt, because sometimes it listens really well and performs exactly what you want in the way that you've defined it within the system prompt. But there's going to be times it's going to have a lot of difficulty performing a certain task that you maybe have defined within the system prompt, because it's just a whole lot harder for LLMs to do certain things. And that could be, for example, counting words. So continuing with the agent, so we have some tools defined here. So as you can see, with the decorator, the orchestrated agent has a tool of determine block format as well. So what it does basically, it calls the format agent. That format agent has certain logic as well, which we see down here. It gets in this prompt with those formats. It then also basically checks that, gets it from the block format, the configuration that we have in there. It checks it, gets it, and it also has some logic for what to do if the formats don't match. It will basically then default to this in-depth block format that we have defined. So we will also get the target length, and the variable for the target length will get filled. Yeah, and in the end we build the response. So the format, name, target length, min words, max words, everything for the different sections, and basically the whole block outline. So as I said, this orchestrated agent is basically the main agent which orchestrates all the calls to different agents and the tasks required to in the end get or block. So it also has this select research focus areas tool, And this tool basically then also calls another agent, which selects the focus areas for it to research, which also has some logic again defined to ensure that we get what we need for the next step. And what would then be is that we put through those research focus areas, those queries, let's say, through this another tool, which is called the Research Factory, which is again another agent, which is going to basically call Perplexity, put in a request, and it's going to get back an amount an amount of queries from this research agent. And this research agent we have defined below, and this is going to create a certain response that we need. So it does the research, it's going to get back what we knew or what we have earlier defined. It's going to get back what we need. So in that sense, that would be those research title, the main points, the main text, the sources, everything. This is a lot of stuff to process, but you can already start to see through this, you can start thinking of how would I create my agent for my specific use case. And start small with these main tools. So that's the functions themselves, the dependencies, the classes, and then also the system prompts, and then some of the validation functions. And starting with that, you can easily reach some really good results, which are then also strong validated results. So your agent won't go awry easily. So going over to utilities, we basically also have defined some easy, simple utilities that we need for the agent to function well. In this sense, we have a very simple function. So it basically returns the length of a certain text, and it uses this to count the words in its section, which is very important, for example, for the section writing agent. So what it comes down to is that it basically uses that utility that we talked about as well. So it's very important that somewhere we also define some simple utilities. These are basically also tools, but way simpler than the ones that we looked earlier at, which could be, for example, a tool could be another call to another agent, or something that we ask specifically or from the agent. In this sense, a utility is a very simple function like counting words, counting text. And this function is then used by the section writing agent, which then has this function defined of check word count. And this is basically using that function of counting words. So this is a tool that uses the utility to count words. It then has a return defined, so a certain word count, target word count, the difference between those, percentage of the target, then also a certain analysis if it's too long or not, which then can also later inform or review agent if there has work to be done, if there needs to be something polished. Looking at this workflow function, which is the final step, we start off with the research phase, and here we basically start calling the agents. We again put in prompts. So it has the system prompt, which basically defines how we want it to usually work and how it should work and give us back results. And then these are the prompts that we put in, the task that we give it to run at this moment in this workflow. So we say I'm writing it, and then you give the type of the block about the topic that you mentioned, and we basically then form the prompt by giving it a list of research configurations. So these are the research focus areas, and basically from this, the logic that we defined earlier starts working together and put in the work and starts the research process. So this is a lot of code, and I can understand that this is a little bit overwhelming. So yeah, it basically then also calls the research agent. So the Perplexity API gets called. The research results are then put into this combined research. We of course have the sources that we also need. Then the block outline is created. This is basically needed for the plan, the block plan that's then put in work by the orchestrator. So here we see, okay, create the outline of the type of block. The block is about, again, and then the formats that we mentioned earlier with all the dependencies. So yeah, from this we get back our results. So, and at some point it reaches an iterative writing process. So this is basically the sections that get written, which are then reviewed by the review agent, and it gets put back for another round whenever it doesn't meet the standards. And then it has to implement basically the feedback of the review agent. So we do this by a certain score, but then also the target word count, which is basically validated and checked. It of course needs the context of the previous sections to know how the flow is. And there's a lot of logic in here to validate the answer. This is basically to make sure that the block puts out what we want. So it does all the if statements and what happens if it does not meet the standards, if it does something that we do not want it to do. There's a lot of logic and code in here, which gives us a good picture of how you would usually think, or where most of your time goes into whenever you create agents, because usually you can easily get a result out of it, but if it's the result that you want and if it's consistent is basically the real challenge. And this time I will not go deep into how we can make sure how we do that, because otherwise we can continue and make this video very long. But this video is basically on how I did reach this block writing agent and the core functions, tools, things you need to know to start building agents. So it goes through this iterative review process with all the different if statements, all the checks that are needed for us to be sure that we get the result. So, and then it performs a final review, and this final review, from here we get another assessment, some feedback, a brief string with your assessment, and this assessment gets also put in. We have this polish agent which starts polishing the sections section by section. So, and here we see why we needed the word count. So we have a total original words, total polished words, and then basically within here it uses this prompt where we put in the word count, and from here it knows if it's either within the requirements or if it falls out of the requirements and it needs more work. And that's basically in a nutshell how this block writing agent works. So let's kick off how this whole thing looks like within the terminal. Continuing, we basically started running on the agent, and I will go through what the agent did. So we of course started with selecting the focus areas, so it knows based on the research configuration and the focus areas configuration what it usually looks at. So in this case it started looking at overview, basic concepts, technical details and implementation, current applications and use cases, benefits and advantages, and challenges and limitations. So it then uses these to start the research process. It also gives an explanation why each of those research areas is important. So for example, highlights the value proposition of using the model context protocol. And that's for research area benefits and advantages. It then starts the research process. So we can see some of it happening here. So research for educational blog about model context protocol, and then the focus area. So it did this. Then from the research results, it started creating the block outline, and it added those research results to the block plan. And this basically kickstarted the writing process. So in this case, the writing agent started writing the sections It also gives the word count as set with the percentage of those words. And this basically goes through everything. It also, for example, says completed after one iteration, because it will look at if it's within the limits of the word count, if it's not below or too much over it. And it will also check for certain sections, if I'm right. I'm trying to look at... Yeah, it will also check if citations are needed or not. So in this case, it found that the section 5 would use citations, and in this case it went through in one try, in one iteration, because apparently it already validated that the citations were included. So this is basically how it got through its first block result. Then the review agent gives a feedback. It mentions the strengths, but also some of the improvements. And it starts the section by section polish. So it checks if it's within the word count target. And then it also implements some of the feedback that the review agent had. So this then basically comes down to this polished block. And this is then the final block that's put out. So we have the introduction, we have the background and context, technical overview, for example, a coding example, business benefits, implementation considerations. We also see some of the citations used here, also with the references down below. In this case, it did a duplicate of it, so that would be, for example, a mistake that we would have to remove, so it's not perfect. And then it also looks at the future implications and the conclusion. So benefits and advantages are within here. And then in the end, it also adds all of the sources it used for the creation of this block. And that's basically how this block writing agent works. So over to the final recommendation, and one of the best tips I think out there for building agents. And this is a tip given by Dave Abelard, which is a very good YouTuber, which you should check out definitely to stay up to date with some of these frameworks as well. So the final tip is to use a setting within your VS Code, if you use that, so that's within Cursor as well, to basically use Jupyter and an interactive window to run selected code within that window and see what the response is that you get back, see the data and everything. So we can, I'll show you in a bit, Jupyter window to run certain pieces of the Python file that you wrote, certain pieces of Python. So when we run these pieces of code, it's sometimes hard because you have to define certain parts of code earlier to be able to run a certain function, for example. In this case, you can already see what I did. So I can basically run this separately and then later inspect what results will be. So this will run the selection agent. We give it this task, this prompt, and it will select those focus areas. And what we can do with this, we can basically debug if it would be a problem. If it would error out, for example, you can look at results and see, okay, but what's exactly the reason why my other agent is failing? Why is this input not working? And then we look at, for example, this result, its data, and then we see what the response is exactly. And we can exactly see what the agent did and gave back. So this is basically how you can use the Jupyter window to start debugging and start building and speeding up your agent development process a lot. So with that, we round up this video. This is a very short introductory into the Pydantic framework. There's a lot more into this framework. Again, definitely check that out on their website. Within the documentation, there's a lot of tools out there. This is basically just a very easy setup to get started, even if you don't know a thing about building agents. Anthropic actually also put out a blog post, which I'm also going to link down in the description, which basically gives an overview of the different sort of workflows you can think of with building agents or using, for example, agentic workflows. And this is basically just to give you a practical example of that. So how would that look like? And I hope you took something away from this, got some ideas for yourself on how you can create certain agents or agentic workflows for yourself. And I think with this use case of a blog writer, we have seen an example of how you could create for whatever type of business that writes blogs easily more value by basically replacing a lot of the research process, a lot of the content structuring with this agent, and already basically remove a lot of work to get somebody to focus on the more essential parts within the blog. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like if you did enjoy the video and if you took something away from this. Again, this is not a extensive overview of the Pydantic framework. This was basically the core of what you would need to create agents, and something for you to look further into. Stay tuned for the next video. In the next video, we are going to look more into fine-tuning models. I actually have a real use case I'm currently doing for a large telecom company, and we are going to sort of look at this use case, do something for our own, create this fine-tuned model to then do a sentiment, thematic, and topic analysis for us. So stay tuned if you want to watch that video, and I'll see you in the next one.